In this video, I want to explore the concept of shadow work and the dark night of the soul. At the moment, humanity is going through a mass awakening, and before we can see the light, we have to sort through the darkness. So I feel that a lot of us would be going through what we call the dark night of the soul at the moment, and I really hope this video can help as many as possible. So we'll look at what is the dark night of the soul, what are the different phases of the dark night of the soul, and how can we accelerate this process and use this time to our best advantage. I'm Esther, QHHT Level 2 practitioner, and my mission is to help people take their power back and become the beautiful creators that we are all meant to be. So what is the dark night of the soul and how is it different from depression? Well, depression is a low state of mood. It's a phase where we feel powerless, where we feel demotivated. It can be caused by a loss. It can be caused by the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, grief. It is a phase where we feel a lot of darkness and we feel that we don't have the power to change things. And in this way, the dark night of the soul can be quite similar to depression, only it feels about 100 times worse. Compared to depression, the dark night of the soul is not a victim state, it's a very active state of transformation. And it is something that should be recognized as so. It is a state of deorientation and reorientation. The dark night of the soul could be broken down into 4 different phases. The first phase that we go through is a phase of loss, a phase of being in the desert. It's when a series of really unfortunate events happen in our lives. It feels like everything is taken away from us. It feels so dark and empty and endless. It mostly happens when we've done a certain amount of work on ourselves and we think, well, I've done all this work, so things can only get better. Only they appear to get worse. We find ourselves on our own. All our friends are too busy doing something else. They don't have time for us. It is a time where life really, really puts us in the corner in a way. It is a time where we have only the option to look inside. And it feels really unfair, but it is a very necessary phase to most people's awakening. Some people do not have to go through the dark night of the soul, but they are quite rare, to be honest. And most of the people that I know, including me, did have to go through this phase to get to their spiritual awakening. So be aware that it is a necessary process and that it will lead you to greater things. So this first phase is when everything seems to fall apart, that we are left alone. All our beliefs and all our values collapse. We start to feel not like ourselves anymore. And that is actually the whole point. The second phase of the dark night of the soul is probably the most painful. It's when life becomes totally meaningless. We don't know who we are anymore. We don't know what we're doing here. We don't understand why we're going through this. We don't see the end of it. It's a very, very dark phase, I would say. This is probably when we find ourselves in the middle of the desert without food and water, and we've been walking for days and we don't get where we're going. We don't understand why we've put ourselves through this. It's It's a phase where we stop believing in life. We don't understand the meaning of life. We don't feel like we belong here. And it's quite often a phase where suicidal thoughts might creep up. It is a phase where we don't feel like we want to be here anymore. And that is totally understandable. But once you know why you're going through this, you'll see why this is also necessary. Because this second phase is a bit like the death of your ego, you could say. I don't really believe in the death of the ego. I believe the ego is actually very useful and that we've been given an ego for a reason. Some people call it an egocentric surrender. And in this way, we are shedding all the layers of our identity. Nothing that mattered to us before matters anymore. Our friends are not really around. We don't really appreciate company at that point. We just want to be alone. We don't feel like we belong in the world, and we don't actually want to be part of the world. We've got nothing to give at that point. And this is quite a normal phase of the dark night of the soul, and probably the most painful one. Carl Jung talks about the persona, and he talks about the necessity of getting rid of the illusion of the persona. So let's talk a little bit about that. The persona in Roman times was the mask that actors used to play different roles. So you're probably familiar with the mask of tragedy and comedy. And as we see it, these masks are quite shallow representations of a character. And in the same way, our persona is only a very small part of our identity. Carl Jung talks about the persona like being a compromise between man and society. It is what we believe we are. It is what society makes us believe that we are. It is the programming that we've been given since we were young. It is what we thought we should be. It's acceptable to be in society. It is behaviors that we've learned along the way to be able to cope with our environment. But it is not who we truly are. And so when we go through the dark night of the soul, we suddenly start realizing this, either subconsciously or consciously, and we decide to stop playing that role. This is not us. I don't want to be this person who I've been told to be. And it's totally fair enough that you don't want to play that role. But when you're in the dark night of the soul, you don't actually know that there is more you don't see behind the mask yet. And when we are in this process where life has become totally meaningless and we're shedding all the layers of our identity, and we're basically seeing the destruction of our ego, we're watching it unfold, and it is extremely painful. At this point, we mainly feel loss, we mainly feel hurt. Carl Jung talks about the shadows of our personality, the shadows of ourselves. And in this phase of the dark night of the soul, all the shadows come up to the surface to be inspected, to be looked at. All these aspects of ourselves that we've buried deep down because we've been told it's not acceptable to act in this way, it's not acceptable to think in this way. And we've taken that on without really realizing, or we've taken that on and we've decided to hide it because we can't show that in society. So all these shadows come up, and they come up for a reason. They come up because they represent pains that we've buried deep down, and they come up because they need to be transformed. And you might say, so how do you do this? And you have to understand that every pain that we feel, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, Every pain that we feel is a message from our body, from our subconscious. So as we understand this message, we can then decide whether it is still relevant in our life now, or whether it can go, whether it doesn't really belong to us anymore. This is why it's so important to look at this hurt, to look at this pain, because we can then evaluate and see whether it fits or not within us at this point, whether it's part of who we are now. We can look at the analogy of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. The caterpillar goes on eating leaves, living a happy life, and it doesn't really understand that one day it's gonna have to transform into a butterfly. But when it comes to a certain point of maturity, instinctively it will grow, it will make this cocoon around itself and hide inside it, so it can start its transformation. And to transform, the caterpillar has to disintegrate and reassemble all the fragments in a different way. It actually digests itself so it can transform from within. And this might sound like quite an ugly process, but it is a necessary one for the caterpillar to become the butterfly and be reborn and start flying again. And in this way, this is what we are doing in the Dark Night of the Soul. We are digesting, acknowledging, and accepting all the parts of ourselves, whether they're good or whether they're bad, and everything in between. And probably the bad aspects of ourselves are the most difficult ones to digest, I understand, but it is necessary for us to digest every part of ourselves and to reassemble every fragment so we can become our new selves, our best selves. And this can only happen when we have reached a certain amount of maturity, just like the caterpillar has to grow before it can start making this cocoon, right? So that's why we only get to this dark night of the soul when we have done a certain amount of work on ourselves, because we are then ready to take on this big work of transformation. So that requires a little bit of work beforehand to take on then the big work of transformation. But I understand that it is dark in the cocoon. It is very uncomfortable. It is blind also, because we don't see, we don't have perspective, so we don't understand why it's happening. And that's why we fall in despair, that's why we fall into these suicidal thoughts, that's why we become impatient, and that's why life becomes so meaningless, because we don't understand this process as it is happening, because our persona is getting completely destroyed and we don't see the point of it, yeah? And that brings us to the third phase of the Dark Night of the Soul, a phase where we realize who we really are. So once we can see behind the mask, once we can break through the illusion of the persona, we can get to the truth of who we really are. Our higher self knows this all along, and that's why it's putting us through this process of destroying the persona, because it knows that without destroying this illusion, we won't be able to see past it, we won't be able to see who we truly are. Our higher self knows that we are multi-dimensional beings, that we are powerful beings of choice, that we are powerful creators and manifestors, but it is necessary for us to kill this fake identity, this thing that we thought we were, to understand that we are these powerful creators. So this process of destruction is actually also a process of creation, and that's what's really beautiful in the Dark Night of the Soul, and very paradoxal, you could say. So it is about realizing the programming that we've been put through and that we put ourselves through. It is about realizing the trick that we've put on ourselves to believe that we were this certain identity, that we can go beyond, that we can break through our limitations, and that we can start becoming who we are truly meant to be. We act often because of unconscious beliefs. Our behaviors to ourselves and to the world around us is affected by our unconscious beliefs. And if we don't know what they are, if we are not aware of our shadows, then it will still affect us, but we will not understand why we are behaving in a certain way. And that's why we can have toxic patterns or toxic relationships. And that's why we can self-sabotage. And that's why we can have low self-esteem and not recognize the value in us. This brings us to the last and probably most beautiful phase of the dark night of the soul. The phase where you can start redesigning your new self. You can become your new self. And so Carl Jung talks about shadow work being the path of the heart warrior. You've done the training, you've become this great warrior, and now you can take on the battle with the persona and you can come out victorious. Shadow work is extremely empowering. It is the way to our individuality. It is the door to our own uniqueness. It is where we discover our gifts, what we can offer to the world. It is a way of discovering who we really are and what we're really meant to be here on earth. Every pain that we feel is a message from our subconscious. It's a chance for us to grow. As we examine that pain, that shadow, and as we see the relevance of it in our life now, as we see the lesson and the message that it holds, and as we understand this message, we're able to let it go. And so it doesn't govern us anymore. We are now masters of our own existence. So shadow work is extremely empowering. It allows us to be the observer of our thoughts. And as we observe our thoughts, we're able to respond to the world in a much more conscious way instead of reacting in an impulsive way and be self-sabotaging or being toxic or attracting toxic situations. So there is great power in shadow work, and it's something that shouldn't be overlooked, and it's something that should be really given the time. And so now we can look at ways to speed up the process of the dark night of the soul. Well, first of all, it's important to stay sober. Sex, drugs and rock and roll are quite distracting at this point, and they're not going to help with the process. So the more sober, the more you can feel the pain, even though it's hard, but the more you'll be able to understand it and release it. It's important to spend time on our own. So we give time for the shadows to come up. So we give ourselves time to be kind to ourselves and to go through this process. It's a good time to meditate, of course, exercise, keep things moving, keep the energies moving as you're transforming, keep everything moving so it can flow and so we don't get stagnant energies. It's a good time to also maybe analyze your dreams. Dreams are a very intelligent and a very effective way that we can look at our shadows. They're the way our subconscious tells us stories to bring up hidden emotions or hidden patterns that we might have. It's a great way to look inside, and you can find dream dictionaries online where you can take the main elements of your dreams and start seeing the definition and take what resonates with you. It's good to write down your dreams so they can be out of your head and on paper, even if you don't understand them straight away. They will have a meaning later. Another way is also to get rid of stuff. Sometimes we have objects or clothes that remind us of a certain event in our lives, of a certain emotion. So if you feel that this doesn't belong to your new self, it might be a good thing to get rid of it, either sell it or give it away. It might be a good way to make room for the new self, for the new you. We can also use this time to start reprogramming ourselves, especially in the last phase of the dark night of the soul. It's a really good time to start remodeling and designing who we really want to be. Joe Dispenza talks about the fact that if we change our thoughts, we can change our reality. And so at first, when all these negative thoughts come up, you can examine them and decide whether they still belong to you or not. And we start replacing them with affirmations or things that we want to be. Steve Noble on YouTube has a great series of affirmations that you can use. You can play them in the background, or when you're walking, or when you're doing your stuff, or if you want to play them when you're sitting in meditation, that's good too. Take what resonates with you again and see what works with you, but this is a great way to reprogram yourself. It's what Joe Dispenza called fake it till you make it. And these might not seem quite natural at first, but the more you get around the idea, the more you get used to the idea, the more they'll become you and the more you'll become them. So it's a great way to use this time to reprogram yourself and remodel yourself. So if you find yourself in the dark night of the soul, remember that it is just a phase, that you're in it because you can do it. You're this great heart warrior now, and you've taken on this challenge because you can come out victorious. Remember that it might take a little while for people to get used to the new you. It might take you a little while to get used to the new you, so be kind to yourself in that way. And remember that it is a very empowering phase of one's awakening. It's a phase where we get to take our power back to decide who we want to be and what we want to bring to the world. So think carefully and really take the time and really give it your best. Like anything in life, the more you put in, the more you get from it. So it's really worth really trying. And remember that the more proactive you are in this process, the quicker it will be. The dark night of the soul is something that can happen several times in one's life. And it's a sign of great evolution. Remember that the next time it comes around, it'll be a lot easier because you will be able to recognize it and you'll be able to act upon it much quicker. And be proud of yourself and get ready to celebrate the new you and the new adventure that you will take on when you come out of this process. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was insightful. Please let me know in the comments. Obviously, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. If you feel that you have a friend going through this, it might be useful for them to watch this video. And yeah, until next time, best of luck and really be the warrior that you're meant to be, and enjoy your new life and your new self. Thank you. Blessings.